There's already a Mossad CIA. I would argue it's a front. It's a company called Gabriel that sells like preventative tech to schools and churches to prevent shootings before they happen. If you're interested in reading about them, you can search for Gabriel on Unlimited Hangout. But there's been efforts to sort of build up, position particular companies for this, what I would call pre-crime infrastructure. And they, in 2019 specifically, they really started selling themselves as preventing mass shootings before they happen.
Whitney Webb reveals how intelligence-linked companies, often funded by controversial figures like Jeffrey Epstein, have quietly taken over critical infrastructure such as 911 call systems, selling themselves as solutions to mass shootings and public safety. She traces the bipartisan push for digital ID, the legal groundwork for predictive policing, and the way mass tragedies are used to justify a new era of pre-crime and mass control.
In 2019 specifically, they really started selling themselves as preventing mass shootings before they happen. One of these companies was Carbine 911, now known as Carbine, which people may remember was financed heavily by Jeffrey Epstein and Leslie Wexner, and Ehud Barak used to be the chairman, and a lot of, Israeli intelligence people, including like the commander of Unit 8200 were on the board. An Epstein associate named Nicole Junkerman was on the board. And then the Epstein Association came out and they tried to distance themselves, yada, yada, yada. But they were selling themselves to take over 911 call systems throughout the U.S. and basically sold themselves in 2019 that we can stop mass shootings before they happen, or increase response time and all of these things. And now they've slowly taken over the 911 call systems of a litany of counties across the United States. But after the Epstein stuff came out, they tried to rebrand as more American. So they only left one, ex-Israeli intelligence guy that co-founded it, there. And they put like Michael Chertoff on the board of advisors, who was former DHS. And they put one of Trump's previous heads of DHS, Christian Nielsen, I think her name was. And then an ex-FBI guy or something to try and, I guess, make it look more American. But it's really the same type of program. And also Peter Thiel was a big investor in that, and now recently published emails from Epstein World that have come out in the first half of this year show Ehud Barak and Epstein talking about meeting with Peter Thiel specifically about Carbine. And, that's relevant because of, Thiel and Palantir being specifically pre-crime focused. And what's important too is, back at the end of 2019, when all of this was going on, Trump was in office the first time, and all of these, mass shootings were happening, and there was an outcry about it, like the El Paso Walmart shooting, for example, and a few other things that took place in a relatively short period of time. And what's interesting about that is before those shootings happened, not long before, William Barr, who was Attorney General, gave this speech where he basically was like, we need to remove encryption. We have to have a federal backdoor into everything encrypted, all encrypted software. And we'll eventually get that because what he called a galvanizing event would soon happen that would help reduce Americans' resistance to that policy, right? And then all of these shootings happen, and then not long after that, William Barr makes pre-crime an official policy of the Department of Justice. So he set up the infrastructure to legalize pre-crime at that time, in October 2019. And so it's been being built on ever since, but they haven't really necessarily deployed it massively, right? But they've set up the legal infrastructure to legalize it, and they created a program under which the DOJ has made a few arrests that's called DEEP. It's an acronym. I forget exactly what it stands for, but they've made a few arrests where they've arrested people preemptively for social media posts. Right. And then in that same period of time, also, Trump came out and his touted response to these mass shootings was to have social media sites deploy some sort of software program that would detect shooters before they can act. Right. So continuing to build on this pre-crime thing. And at the time, he was being pitched, and the biggest lobbyist in the administration for it was Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, to create this new agency, a health DARPA, or a HARPA, they called it. And the first program of it the pilot program of it was called Safe Homes, which is again another very long acronym for something that I don't remember. Sorry, but basically the idea of it was to have AI scour American social media posts in mass, and then use an algorithm to determine which posts show users exhibiting early neuropsychiatric warning signs, and that if they were, flagged, they could be triaged to a variety of solutions, like court-ordered physicians.
We did a video on Trump calling for ABC and NBC to lose their broadcast licenses, and if you've seen the headlines online, you can see how wild the coverage has been. But this week, I want to show you some deeper context using ground news. On one side, outlets framed it as a serious constitutional issue, while others echoed Trump's complaints directly. Seeing those headlines side by side on ground news really shows just how differently narratives are being shaped depending on where you look. Ground news is a new tool I've been using to break down how stories like this are reported. You can see bias ratings, who owns the outlet, how factual their reporting is, and compare coverage across the political spectrum all in one place. They even have a feature called the blind spot feed that specifically highlights stories that are being disproportionately covered. I haven't found anything else that organizes this much information so clearly. It's clear why it's getting so much attention. Apple has even spotlighted it as App of the Day 5 times across 38 countries. If you want to start accessing the news in a way where you can see the full picture and understand why stories are reported the way they are, head to ground.news/ONLYSAVY. Through that link, you'll get 40% off unlimited access with the Vantage subscription, which is the same plan I use to do all of this. Webb explains how the definition of domestic terrorism has been steadily broadened to include dissenters from all sides, and how vague legal language allows authorities to target anyone deemed inconvenient. She warns that the infrastructure for predictive policing and digital surveillance is being built under the radar, with the public's consent manufactured through fear and crisis.
Psychiatrists, right, or like potentially house arrest, just for having social media posts that the AI has determined is bad. It's very messed up. So, ultimately they didn't make HARPA, but Biden made HARPA. It's called ARPA-H. And the same architects of the HARPA that was being pitched under Trump ended up being the same architects of Biden's ARPA-H, but ARPA-H was sold as a cancer moonshot. We're going to cure cancer with ARPA-H. But I mean, ARPA-H is absolutely still around and still has these kinds of this kind of focus in addition to its health focus, right? So, unfortunately, the Trump administration, or at least Trump as a president, has that precedent from his previous administration of responding to concerns about guns by being like, we should apply pre-crime to American social media posts and determine who might be a bad actor before they commit any crime. And from the civil liberty perspective, this is terrible. Mm-hmm. And an even greater warning sign is the increasing involvement, which you brought up earlier, Marty, of Palantir in this administration, because Palantir was specifically really created to be a pre-crime entity. It is a successor to this post 9/11 program that was housed in DARPA, called Total Information Awareness, and it's been Palantir since then has been piloting predictive policing throughout the country. I think they first started doing that in the 2014-2015 window, they because of their connections with all of, pretty much every U.S. intelligence agency and how much data they cover up and hold on every American, having Palantir, be involved in the government so extensively. And also now in like your taxes, like their recent partnership with like the IRS and, with mortgages and like increasingly getting involved with finances and also, running a lot of major Wall Street banks. It could potentially get very, very complicated. And so we're sort of at this stage where a lot of this infrastructure is starting to come together. And in order to get people to relinquish civil liberties enough to have this kind of predictive policing infrastructure be the norm, something really big has to happen. People have to get really angry. And more importantly, people have to get really insecure and fearful. Right. Yeah. And so, I worry that this is sort of an important moment, an inflection point where they're going to try and start pushing us in that direction.
A turning point.
Well, I was going to say that, but I didn't want to. But I mean, Trump and Elon Musk and some of these other people explicitly made that, signaling in their statements around the Charlie Kirk Memorial, for example, that this is a turning point and all of that. But we don't want it to be a turning point where it leads us to a dark end point. I would argue, who are some domestic terrorists that should be gone after? I don't know. What about Dick Cheney? What about Leslie Wexner, who funded Jeffrey? Why can't we investigate them with all of the resources of DHS and the Palantir and the NSA and whatever? Like, why can't we go after people like that? But instead, it's going to be pointed at regular people. And what I am concerned about too, specifically with like the Antifa branding, is that they'll try and conflate anyone who criticizes fascism in general as being somehow affiliated with Antifa. And there was a Zero Hedge story that I read talking about the Antifa labeling that basically was conflating like people who are anti-fascist but not necessarily associated with the group Antifa as being part of it. And that's complicated because maybe you're someone like me and you don't like fascism or communism.
Right. Fancy that.
And do we, if there's an issue where it becomes very apparent or a policy is being put forth that would very much, bring to fruition the Mussolini style of fascism, of corporatism, a fusion of corporation and state, and you want to criticize that, will you get labeled as
anti-fascist,
as part of these organizations? And people might think that's kind of far off, but I mean, think about how the original war of terror went, right? Where regular people in the U.S. that happened to be Muslim were targeted, and even though they had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. Right.
Well,
and now you have the former head of Al-Qaeda being given a diplomatic welcome in New York.
Webb urges listeners to recognize the patterns. Every crisis is used to justify more control, and the infrastructure for digital surveillance is being quietly assembled. The only way to resist, she suggests, is to refuse compliance, build local resilience, and see through the narratives designed to divide and pacify society.